In pretty much precisely an hour from now, we're going to be talking with Glasgow nightclub owner Donald MacLeod, who's got some very strong words to say about the SNP, Scottish National Party, imposing vaccine passports on the nation. That will affect his business. People won't be allowed into his clubs unless they can prove they've had double jabs. Will this kind of stricture be coming south of the border fairly soon? I wouldn't mind betting that it will, and it'll also take place in Wales and Northern Ireland. This is going to sweep the nation. But the other aspect of the vaccine obsession is, of course, vaccinating children, which the Joint Committee for Vaccination and Immunisation has advised the government is a bad idea. They've recommended against it because there is no medical reason to vaccinate children. You would only do it to protect the community, and a lot of people, including me, say we should not be sacrificing our children's safety just to keep us safe. That's a wrong thing to do. So vaccinating children is a very hot issue, and of course the government has turned around and said, oh well, the JCVI has said no, so we're not going to follow their science. We're going to look for someone else. Now it looks like Chris Whitty has stepped in, and the word is he's going to approve COVID jabs for teenagers, overruling the government body or the advisory body that is there to advise the government on this. So this looks like political chicanery to me, and brings into question, why is the government so obsessed with vaccinating kids? Let's talk to social commentator Dominique Samuels. Good evening, Dominic.
Good evening, Kevin. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for joining me. Look, here's the situation. As you well know, every doctor will tell you, medically, there is no reason to vaccinate children, particularly 12-year-olds, because if they get COVID, the symptoms will be so mild, most of them won't even know they've got it. If they do get any symptoms, they'll hardly know it. They definitely won't die from it. So there's no point in vaccinating children for medical reasons. The only reason you'd vaccinate them is some kind of obsession with trying to protect the old and the vulnerable and the rest of the community. And I would contend you shouldn't do that. You should not put these kids at risk just for our sake. And they are being put at risk because although, the vaccine by and large seems to be safe, we don't know in the long term what the effects might be. So there's no need to medically vaccinate them. So why put them at risk, however small, of possible long-term effects? So the joint, bear with me, stick with me, Dominic. The Joint Committee for Vaccination and Immunisation has advised the government against it. So in steps the Chief Medical Officer, Chris Whitty, who we're told will approve COVID jabs, not for medical reasons, but because for teenagers it will boost their mental health and social development. This is a disgrace, isn't it, Dominic?
It's a complete disgrace, and I think it just demonstrates that this is more of a political decision rather than one based on health. I do have my suspicions about the purpose of this. Because the government was recently told, actually, because we know now that whether you're vaccinated or not, you have a similar chance of passing on the virus. Vaccine herd immunity is virtually futile, and the government was told this by its scientific advisors, but it doesn't seem to have taken note. And especially in relation to vaccinating 12 to 15-year-olds, new evidence has come out. This was published by The Telegraph, that for teenage boys in particular, you are 6 times more likely to develop heart inflammation than you are to be hospitalized from contracting COVID-19. There's virtually no risk to children in terms of death. So it begs the question of why this is actually being done. And I feel as though this is to ease the paranoia and the hysteria that has been drummed up by numerous people in the media to make them feel a bit more safe. When in reality, this isn't going to make anyone necessarily any safe. It's children being exposed to a risk, and we don't know how big this risk is. I mean, I was watching a member of the JCVI on this morning with Holly Willoughby and Philip Schofield, and he actually said, we don't know the long-term data in terms of these vaccines. So that's why the risk and benefit analysis just didn't come up trumps. So the fact that the government is ignoring this, I think it's bizarre. And my suspicion is that, 12 to 15-year-olds may be added to vaccine passports in the future. That's my suspicion.
Yeah, I mean, it does make you go scrabbling for possible reasons why they would want to do this. Because as you say, even if you do vaccinate kids unnecessarily, in the assumption that maybe that will stop them passing it on or something, we know now the vaccine doesn't stop you passing it on. So what on earth are they doing this for? And you're quite right, of course, Dominic, because of the nature of the emergency, the medical emergency we've been through, they were able to test these vaccines in the short term, but by definition, they didn't have time to test them in the long term. So the consensus was for adults, it was worth rolling the dice because the chances are they're probably okay. But you shouldn't subject kids to that risk when you don't need to do it to them, when there's no medical advantage to them to do this to them. So it's extremely strange. And now you've got the chief medical officer saying that the reason we should do it is it'll boost teenagers' mental health and social development. What's that mean?
For Chris Whitty to say this, I think this is quite frankly gaslighting. I mean, in what world would vaccinating 12 to 15-year-olds boost their mental health? I'll tell you what has been a detriment to mental health, to the mental health of young people. It's been lockdowns. Yeah. It's been school. It's been the radical transformation of their lives, isolating them, making them more depressed, completely ruining their prospects, ruining the economy of which they're going to have to go out and participate in eventually. That's what's going to ruin their mental health. It's not got anything to do with vaccines. And this is the gaslighting that we see constantly from COVID fanatics, saying that children need to participate in lockdown, participate in vaccines in order to improve their daily life. No, what we need is for adults to be adults and recognise that our job is to protect children. It's not the other way around.
Exactly right, Dominic. It is our job to protect them. It isn't their job to protect us. It's our responsibility to protect them. Now, I've always thought that Chris Whitty, although, to my money, he's often been very hard to agree with, and his sort of next slide, please, shtick is kind of infuriating. But I've always thought he's a decent man trying to do what he thought was best for the nation. But if these stories are true, that he's going to override the Joint Committee for Vaccination and Immunisation with this kind of nonsensical excuse for vaccinating children, boosting their mental health and social development, then he has officially become a government stooge doing his master's bidding, as in Boris Johnson and Sajid Javid. Very disappointed in him if this story turns out to be true.
It's very disappointing, but I'm afraid, in my view, it's not entirely surprising. I think a lot of the decisions that have been made have been entirely political. For example, the closure of schools. We know various scientists have said this, that schools are not really a hotspot for infection, neither are pubs. For example, and they were still closed. They've been treated really badly, actually, and the same goes for children. Children are not super spreaders of the virus either. There's no real medical evidence, past or present, that really backs that up. Yet we still continue with these draconian and entirely political policies. I think what should happen is we continue to prioritise the vulnerable and the old, and that may include vulnerable young people. So if they would benefit from it, in comparison, then of course they should get it. But there shouldn't be a mass vaccination of children, especially when we know that there is an increased risk for certain groups, especially, most definitely, teenage boys.
Yeah, I should stress when we say there is no medical reason to vaccinate children, we mean healthy children. There are, of course, children who are vulnerable, who would benefit from the vaccine, but they're very, very small in number. In other words, basically, kids do not need the vaccine. I've interviewed at least 3 doctors over the last 2 weeks who have emphatically said, no, no, no. we should not be doing this. There is no medical reason to do it. And they were as baffled as you and I as to why the government seems intent on ploughing ahead with this extraordinary scheme. And there's another element to this, Dominic, which is even more frightening, and that is there have been noises from the government, particularly Nadhim Sawali, saying that if parents say no to their kids getting the vaccines, they'll hand the choice over to the children. In other words, children will override their parents. Before we answer this question, Dominic, let's just have a listen to Nadhim Sawali, showing how you can never trust this government from one day to the next.
And if other countries require you to show proof of that evidence, then that is obviously up to those countries, but we have no plan of introducing a vaccine passport.
Yeah, so there's another element to this government. So we know that vaccine passports are coming our way as well. But let's go back to the question of because Nadhim Sawali has also said there's a possibility, and he's talking about, some 12-year-olds are very mature and can make these decisions. So there's a serious possibility that these jab squads, who have already been hired by Sajid Javid, and they're ready to march into schools, will override what parents want. And the kids will be in charge of making decisions about a serious medical procedure, as in the vaccine. It will be their choice and not their parents. I mean, that to me, in a country like Britain, which is supposed to be a free democracy, is scarcely believable.
Oh, I completely agree. And if, I remember correctly, school teachers aren't allowed to give Calpol or even sunscreen without parental consent. Yet we're fully prepared to administer vaccines without the consent of a parent. I think that is completely ridiculous. My brother actually came home from school today and told me that he was accidentally offered the vaccine as well. No knowledge from my mum.
Really?
Yeah, no knowledge from any of us. And that was actually at school. He refused because his name wasn't on the list, apparently. So he didn't have to get it. But I think that's really scary, especially when it's occurring in schools. And, what a main principle of vaccination should be informed consent. And that's just not what we're encouraging right now. And we're giving bribes for vaccines. We're threatening social exclusion, being barred from society if you don't get a vaccine. In what way is that, informed consent? What will happen is that many young people, many kids in school will feel socially ostracized if they don't undergo this medical procedure, which will then lead them to actually get it. It won't because they think it will be of any benefit to them. Do we really want to live in a society like that? Because I really don't.
Yeah, and what are parents going to react to, when they find this out, that they would obviously want to be involved in this decision whether or not their kids are vaccinated, but the state is taking over what's happening to their kids, and they're going to be cut out of the equation, potentially. We don't know this yet, but as I say, Nadhim Sawali has said it's a possibility. Sajid Javid has not ruled it out. So it's a definite potential situation that the state will decide whether or not children are vaccinated, and a 12-year-old will be asked, do you consent to this? And no doubt be told, if you don't, you might kill your granny and you can't play with your friends.
Exactly. And in my view, this idea that 12-year-olds do not need parental consent to undergo a medical procedure, I feel like this is a bit of an attack, really, on the authority of parents over their children's lives. And I can imagine that many people who supported lockdowns maybe thought they were necessary. I myself didn't. But I can imagine many who supported the lockdown, supported the COVID measures, are looking at these kinds of policies now that are further eroding bodily autonomy and the authority that parents have over their children. I can imagine they're looking at these decisions and thinking, hold on a minute, this is going too far. But unfortunately, this is what happens when you allow the state to have such extensive control over your daily lives. You've opened a door that cannot necessarily be closed now. And that's because there was so much public consent for things like lockdown, unfortunately. So now you've got Nadhim Sahawi saying that 12-year-olds can make that decisions for themselves. Parents don't matter. And now you've got them also saying that businesses can bar individuals from society if they don't have the right vaccination status. This is complete dystopia.
Yeah, it is. I was, what on earth is going on in this country? And as I say, Dominic, I predict that there may be trouble ahead, in the words of the song, because parents are going to go up the wall about this. So, sorry, it's nothing to do with you, whether or not your child gets vaccinated. I don't know a mother or father in this entire country who would not turn around and say, well, excuse me, I think it is to do with me. It's to do with the parents have to make this decision, not the state and not the kid. Dominic, always a pleasure to talk. Thank you so much for your time. Dominique Samuels there with very strong words, and I couldn't agree with her more. I'm Kevin O'Sullivan, and this is Talk Radio.